I'm joined today by Professor Barry Hughes. Barry is at the University of Denver at their Korbel School of International Studies and also at their Pardee Center for International Futures. And I'm going to ask him what he thinks the future of disruptions and how we study disruptions might look like in a post-COVID world.
We were interested in understanding how global change is affecting human development, reduction of poverty, prevention of famine, of social change. We're interested in all of those things, and we've been studying them long term, but we've typically looked at them in terms of the gradual change and bending the curves, trying to accelerate the changing of the curves, obviously, trying to accelerate the attainment of a world without extreme poverty or rapid environmental disruption. But we haven't looked at it very often in terms of the disruptions that accompany those processes of longer term change. And COVID is very much forcing us to do that. And I think it's alerting us to the need not just to think in terms of how demographics unfold with changing aging processes, with how international politics unfold, with the rise of China, how the transition to renewable energy forms unfolds. It's going to force us to deal with these disruptions, which may become increasingly frequent and prominent in some of these global change processes.
Any thoughts on response, on preparedness, particularly by international institutions?
Their day-to-day focus on initiatives is been transformed in many ways by COVID. They're very much concerned about what the immediate implications for poverty are, what the implications of the buildup of debt burdens in many countries will be, what the changing trade patterns as a result of the disruption and the movement perhaps towards local production as opposed to dependence on imports. It's putting a considerable burden on us actually in my field because it's in many respects easier to think about the change processes over 20 years and the gradual progress we make on so many of these issues or don't make on some of these issues, the deterioration of in some areas. But it raises a whole different set of questions when you start dealing with the shorter term.
How do you think this experience might impact the work of those who think about the longer range future or how they think about the longer range future?
I think this will cause in a way a fundamental shift in the way we do long-term work. We've known, just as we knew that pandemics were possible, we've known that other disruptions, wildcards, shocks were possible. We've thought about trigger points on environmental change, climate change, release of methane, etc. But we haven't really dealt with them in our day-to-day work on longer term change modeling. I don't think we're going to be able to go back to looking only at these things in a trend fashion. We're going to have to always be asking ourselves the question, what if this shock, what if that shock? The whole notion of obviously enhancing resilience, which we've also talked about for forever in this field, is taking on an increasing prominence. So there is going to be a longer term impact on the way we work, the way we think, and hopefully in the broader world out there, the way we act.
What has surprised you in this disruption, in this moment of COVID?
The lack of preparedness, I guess, was one of the shocks. I thought we were actually in a stronger position than we were. I mean, we've been thinking about the possibility of pandemics, obviously, for a long time. We've been thinking about them in terms of, for instance, the growing antibiotic resistance of bacteria. We've been obviously made aware of them as a result of Ebola and HIV/AIDS. and so on. Obviously, malaria and TB and the burden of that disease. So with all of this in front of us, with all of this knowledge that we've had, the inability to be prepared for this shock has shocked me.